Subconscious mind mastery, 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 mastery.
And welcome to the Subconscious Mind Mastery Podcast. I'm Thomas Miller. Thank you so much for joining us. This episode is being simulcast audio and video. And I am going to be going through a little slide presentation. So if you'd like to check that out, come over to the Subconscious Mind Mastery Podcast YouTube channel and you can see the video. We'd love to have you check that out. There's going to be a little demonstration here toward the end as well. I wanted to go through something here that I think is so significant for all of us. And after doing this for about 15 years, I wanted to bring you from almost basically beginning to where my journey has progressed to this point. And I'm going through something right now where once again, this entire process is being tested. And that's why I thought, oh, this is perfect, because this is what we've been doing since 2013 when this podcast began, is telling stories about places and situations that I found myself in that maybe a lesson could be extracted and we could all learn from it. So that's the idea of what I'm hoping to accomplish here today. I wanted to talk about this subconscious programming timeline for all of our lives. And I just thought from the very beginning, because this is exactly where I am right now, that prayer is us talking to our higher source, say talking to God, and intuition is God talking back to us. And so much of my own story, especially since, 2009 is when it all began, but especially 2013 forward is when intuition and I got really friendly. And you've heard about this from a lot of the podcast episodes, especially if you've listened to all of them and followed this train all through the decade. The years in Aspen is where it really got perfected, of being able to connect with it and rely on it and know what was going on. And I've said, that took a year and a half. And during that time, I was narrating books for Fred Dodson called Intuition Training. It was something that I was following significantly in my own life. From the learning side, it took a year and a half to apply it to the level that I'm talking about. So this is not it's not a easy kind of process to just snap into existence. This is a growth process. And that's why Enjoy the Journey became so prominent, because it really is about just taking the steps and being okay with where you are along the way, where I am and where we all are. I wanted to go to one little Bible verse that came to my mind as I was putting this together. It's from Isaiah chapter 54, verse 17 in the Old Testament in the Bible. This is God talking through the prophet Isaiah to his people, saying, "No weapon formed against you shall prosper. Every," or you could say any, "tongue rising against you in judgment, you shall condemn. This is the heritage of the servants of the Lord." And a lot of people love that first part of the verse. You may have heard it in some kind of context. Oh, no weapon formed against me shall ever prosper. The Bible says that, Well, we can't really interpret things that way. We have to look at the context of how this was, first of all, being said, to whom it was being said, and why. But to me, this is a lesson in connecting with higher source. This is a lesson in connecting with our higher power. And that's what God was saying here through this implication with his people, is saying that if you follow my path, and if you read the rest of the chapter, that's what it's about. If you follow my path, that's a lot of what those Old Testament stories are. You can even look at them metaphorically of how we wander so much off on our own. We wander away from the path. And I'm talking about our highest timeline path. In other words, as we've discussed, especially on the Fun Astrology podcast, and a lot of the astrology work that I've done, is the Google map of the soul. It shows us that there was a past, there is a present, and there is something that we are moving toward. So it does show us our intended path for this lifetime, which I think is brilliant. But we do have this journey. And a lot of times we get off of the path. And that's when we don't get to claim this verse. But when we do, the comfort of this is, as it says, that no weapon formed against us will prosper. So if we get that intuitive communication from God, God talking to us, here is your path. You're faced with a decision. Here is the decision that is on your higher path. And if you follow that decision, then things are going to work out according to the timeline that you chose here to do. If not, you'll go down the other path, and the Bible is full of stories of the wandering tribes through the desert and through the wilderness and separated from God and off on their own. And well, don't we end up that way? So it really is picturesque of a journey off track. Now, one thing I want to establish from the beginning here, let me reach over. Oh, just a second. I had these and I had to come back and clean the area off. But you guys know from our Level Up, and I'm holding up the Chris Ann Light Seers Tarot deck, is one of my absolute favorite tools. I mean, this thing just speaks. And I know a lot of you have it, and a lot of you would say exactly the same. It's like, yeah, it's amazing. There are definitely times that we need advice. Doesn't matter where I think we are on our journey. There are times that we need either a good ear or a trained counselor with professional advice, and especially if you're dealing with depression. We have a tag that comes on the end of these podcasts for legal reasons, but to say if you need professional help, by all means, get professional help. And there are a lot of times in all of our lives when I've had to do it twice, where I had to rely on professional help. I didn't have the tools I have now, but even then, I mean, depression is a very serious thing, and it is a physiological as well as mental and emotional thing. So if you're feeling levels of depression that are not manageable, by all means, get professional help. But there are also times that we have something within us, that voice of intuition, the ability to follow our highest timeline is something that will guide us along the right path. And then we know, like back to that verse, that we are on the right path and we will be rewarded for being so. Now, I think the process is pretty much the timeline process of this is that we establish beliefs. We were born into a family that helped us establish beliefs in those early years of our life. And then we started to form our own beliefs. In the very earliest podcast episodes, I addressed this in a 3-part series, that we form and we hang on to our beliefs because we did form them. It's something that we constructed. So we're not going to let go of it very easily. And whether that's a belief about politics or about spirituality or about life itself or about how marriage should be, any topic, any subject that we have formulated our belief system around is something that we hold on to pretty tightly. And after we have worked with our belief system, if it's a good, productive belief system, then we start to get some results. And as we get results, we start to trust in our belief system, or we start to doubt it. Some doubt their belief system early on and they make changes. Some, like me, drag it on through the decades, and then finally it pops and you have to sit down and say, wait a minute, what is going on here? So it doesn't matter when it happens. It typically will happen at some point that we re-examine things. We look them over. Or somebody comes into our life that causes us to sit down and examine, do I really believe this? But once we develop trust in our beliefs, then we start to take actions on those, and those become the patterns of our life, and those become the results of our life. And if we've had good beliefs and good decisions, and we've taken a few good turns, then we start to gain a confidence in our path. And even if our path has been not so much on track, we can make the changes like I did and late 40s, almost 50 years old, and you can turn the whole thing around, completely turn the whole thing around. So the process begins where we start to learn about consciousness. We start to realize that we are responsible for our lives, not a church, not a marriage, not a spouse, not a family, not a parent, etc. It's up to us. And we take responsibility for it, and we start to act like I am a co-creator of this life, of this day. And we start to move in that direction. We take responsibility. And it doesn't take long before we start to face those subconscious programs, because boy, they are right there. And they trigger and they flash up just in an instant, because they are what have been driving our life and what continue to drive our life. We're running at that point, at the very beginning of our journey here, we're running off of the old programs, and those have to be changed. And that does take some time to reprogram. So after we've worked through that part of the process, now we become aware that these old programs are really running the show. And if you just do the opposite, you'll not be that far off, that you start to change those old programs. As they come up, you just work on it. You start to change it. Something happens in your life. It reveals one of those programs. You stop, you get out your journal, you make the notes. You go, what could I do differently here? How could I change this programming? You start to believe something different. Maybe you lock it in with affirmations or meditations or subliminal programming or whatever tool it is that locks that in. And that's how you start to, maybe you write over and over and over. You script. But that's how you start to reprogram that old thread. You just don't serve it anymore. Joe Dispenza talks about this a lot in You Are the Placebo, what happens in our body. You have to give it new information and de-amplify that old belief for it to unravel physically. But still, even after doing that work, you realize that this is a deep web. And that those old programs, even then, after you've done the work for maybe you're several years in at this point, maybe 5 years, that you've been walking this new conscious path and you've been working on this. But those old programs show up again, don't they? They do. They are for me right now, but we just keep working on them. Along this process, you develop some new tools and you get some things like a good deck of cards. You learn some astrology. Maybe you even take the horary course from Robert Glasscock and you learn about that piece of astrology. Or you incorporate muscle testing like I'm going to talk about here a little bit later as well. And the big thing today now, I know it's very popular, is plant medicine, as it's broadly called. And that is using hallucinogenic, or to, in other words, get your mind out of the dominant control and allow the influence of the plants, which I agree, our ancestors used them, and it was very spiritual, and it was done in a spiritual way. There's a difference between getting high and having a spiritual process. But I've known people who have done this, and they are very sold on it. Of course, Ram Dass is probably one of the popularizers of this back when I was a kid. I remember when the Ram Dass, back then, Richard Alpert and Timothy Leary thing hit, my mom was just aghast that these men were fired by Harvard for doing these drugs. And now look at where it is. It's a lot different. But our consciousness has risen since then as well. So it's a whole different process. Whether you go into those kinds of things, what I'm talking about here is a package of external things. This is external to my soul. I'm holding up the deck of cards for the audio folks. This is external. Astrology is external as much as I love it. It's an external thing. And what we're looking for is to bring this process internal so that if you were out in the middle of the desert or on a deserted island and there were no plants, there was just sand, and all you had to rely on was what was inside you at that moment, your connection to the home office, as we have said so many times here, that you had that to rely on, that you could communicate with that in a prayer intuition cycle, your source, God, higher power to you, then that would be the way that you would get your answers. If none of these other tools were there, you still could communicate and still find out about your path. That's what's amazing. So now you've really been working on this and you're really making progress on this path. You might even be teaching it to others. You might start your own podcast. You might do courses. Now you're giving back what you have learned. Yet, See, I'm picking on this because it's in there for me right now, and that's why I'm doing it, because this is the old program coming back up. And you just have to realize that we brought a lot of this into this life with us. So the path that we're on is to change it as much as we can, but to realize that it also is there and it is part of us from our very nature that we came into this life with. So the next layer from here for this part of the process is to find that pure intuition that we were talking about. And one of the books that I did for Fred that I thought was one of the best ones that he wrote, as far as what you can take and use every single day to improve your life, is the book called Intuitive Awareness Method. Because in that he describes how to connect with and intuit through a list of options. And isn't that the deal? I mean, how rare is just a clear-cut yes, no, A, B kind of situation? Usually it does involve multiple options and different tangents. If I go this direction, then this is going to be the next branch. And if I go this way, then these are the things that I have to address and think about. So this intuitive awareness method gives you the ability to list all of those things out and then how to go in with intuition. It's only about 3 hours, I think, the whole book. So it's very much worth it. It's a quick listen. Put it on 1.5 because I talk slowly anyway, and go right on through it. And you'll have it. And then you can come back and listen more slowly. And I combine that for myself with muscle testing. Why? It's something that I found that year in the RV in 2009, and it was just something that stayed with me. It works for me. And it's something that I rely on. So I just have stayed with it. I would definitely suggest combining that with the intuitive awareness method. I think it's incredibly powerful. And I'm going to show you in a minute what I do. But what I'm also talking about here is taking the muscle testing piece off the table so that you're just left with the intuitive piece. And we do this as an activity now, as an event. So we basically just like the same thing of an event could be drawing a card, or it could be doing a plant medicine session or something like that, that there is this event that we do in order to specifically seek out intuitive guidance. And the next goal, the reason that we're trying to do this, as I've said, is to take it to the point where we can feel that intuitive guidance all the time. So now we don't need the cards, we don't need the plants, we don't need the other things. We have it all packaged inside. We've learned how to connect to source. We keep that pipeline open. That line to the home office is always answerable. When it rings, I pick up. When I dial out, it picks up. You know, it's like it's always there. It's always on. So now what we're doing by that is connecting with our highest source. We're connecting at this point with God. And that's where we know that we are following our timeline, so that when we are challenged by something, we can go back to that verse, no weapon formed against me shall prosper, because I know that I am on my path here. This is what I'm supposed to be doing. So the challenges then become learning and growth opportunities, because we truly are hearing from our highest path. The key is to keep that connection open. And once you have it open, you will never let it go. It's like you guard it. And there are so many things in our lives and in our culture that want to block or clog up that pipeline. But once you have it open and once you have it clear, you will do just about anything to make sure that it stays clear. Now, I'd like to show you what I do on this, and the sun's coming right in there. I wonder if it's hot enough to burn my button. I don't think so. I think we'll be all right. But I'd like to show you how this worked for me. So what I'm thinking about here is that along our chakra line is where the energy flows mostly in our body, right? So it goes obviously from the very top of our head down to the root chakra area. The solar plexus is active, the heart area, the throat. A lot of times, those are our key areas. You might be developed so that primarily the energy flows out mostly from your third eye or from your crown. But for most of us, I think it's probably somewhere along this area. So what I'm looking for in this just pure intuitive process, no muscle testing, is to feel into neutrality first. So I'm thinking about the energy that is naturally inherent along this line. And then I'm wanting to come to a neutral position. And that takes a lot of practice too, by the way. But once you get there, then you can just kind of know that, okay, I'm in a good centered space right now. And then I will say, show me a yes by elevating the energy up. And I'm just looking for the energy along this line to bump up just a little bit. And I'll just try to center here and do that real quick. Show me a yes. And I feel like I'm feeling it moving toward this camera is what it was doing. It was moving up this way. And this is for you guys on the audio. This is exactly where you would really suggest you come over and take a look at the video because you'll see this demonstration. And then show me no. And even right then, it just kind of rolled from here it was and it rolled down to here. So it was like this, coming from this area down, the heart chakra area up, the heart chakra area down. I'll always ask permission. May I ask about this particular situation? I wait, and it usually drifts upward slightly. And then I'll say, show me yes again. And it just went up. I mean, from here it came, this time it came from my throat area. And it was like between the throat and the heart. It was in between those two chakras. Up. And show me no. And see, that settled down into here, into the solar plexus area. It came from up here, up from the throat, and down from here. Boom. And then I'll ask my question. Should I pick up this deck of cards? Silly. I'm not going to get an answer to that. But this situation that I'm even grappling with right now, I'll ask again just silently because it is a private matter, but I'll just ask again in this context. May I ask about the situation at hand? Yes, it came up this way, came right up through here, through the heart, kind of above the heart. And I'm just setting an intention for only love and light to be the answer, to be the source of the answer. Only good is welcome here. And it's kind of a will this kind of thing take place kind of question. So I'm just going to say, will this situation that I've been asking about, will this become an issue? Oh, wow. When I said issue, here's what happened. When I said, will this become an issue? It came right from my heart, right at the breastbone area, and the energy went down in front. Fell down and in front. That's a no. And here's the deal. That blink, remember how I reacted right there? That blink is the answer. Go back to Malcolm Gladwell's book. I've talked about it a lot. It's that very first impulse. Now, a lot of people will say, how do I tell what's intuition versus the monkey mind taking over or the monkey mind just rattling stuff off? It's that blink. It's that moment. You saw it happen right there. There's this situation in my life that is unfolding. I was asking, will this become an issue? And as soon as I asked it, and I've asked this several times, I'm getting no across the board. Boom. It fell right out in front of me down. That's a no. Because we asked it to sync up that way, in fact, right? Show me a yes, and it goes up, and it came up from the throat area up, and then show me a no, and it came from the heart area and kind of fell down as if something fell off my chest. And so I've already calibrated it for the answer. So that's the process, and it's that very first pulse is the intuitive answer. When you start to analyze it, oh no, that can't be right. Oh, that's too, that's not what I'm looking for. That's another thing. Resistance is a big piece of this as well. If you resist, it's going to mess up, I think, the communication. That's why you have to have that openness, that neutrality at the beginning. But that's a process that you can do at any time for any question. I try to get my questions as close to yes and no as possible, but literally, that is something that you can do across the board every time and tune into that intuition. And then what I'm suggesting in this timeline path that I described in the slides is that once you reach the point where that becomes comfortable for you, then you can trust it, you can take actions toward it, you can adjust your belief system, and then when the doubt comes in, like it has for me here, then you can instantly just release those doubts, come to the place where you stand on the fact that no weapon formed against me now shall prosper. You see how that works? It's standing on that ground of knowing that this is your path. This is the destiny, that the universe now stands beside you. God comes to your aid. And this is where, if something does happen along the way, it's just a little trip to the gym to stretch a muscle and grow more faith. It's a beautiful process, and I hope this helps you. This is kind of, as my friend Judy says, spilling the tea. It's like this is the whole process. And if you learn this, then you will have all the tools you need to walk your own path, even if you're walking it on a desert island and there's nothing, a desert island, deserted island, place where there's, well, that's kind of here. I mean, there's not, it's pretty desert out there. You can go get in trouble real fast heading out into these mountains. But that's the idea, is you can take an empty backpack with you and have your intuition and know the right next thing to do, which probably would be go back and get some water and some food. Hey, I hope this helps. It really is. It's been life-changing for me. And it's kind of interesting that as we're wrapping this up on the video, the afternoon light coming through the blinds is casting a nice little reflection right on the throat chakra. So we'll just amplify that. Thank you so much for listening and watching. Enjoy the journey. I'm Thomas Miller. We'll see you next time.